Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. My name is Irene Squimicle and I'm a freelance writer living in the southern suburbs of Cape Town, South Africa. As a freelance writer, I mainly work from home, where I write articles for my blog, book reviews and online posts for other websites. I'm also currently working on personal writing projects such as short stories and my very first novel. Apart from writing, I also have ambition to improve my drawing skills and maybe even illustrate for one of my writing projects. Specifically, a story about a honeybee, her friends, and the farm they live on called Weltevrede. Last year, I considered participating in a drawing challenge for the month of October. I wanted to motivate myself to draw more and use the drawing challenge as an opportunity to draw 31 different poses of bees, since one of my main characters in my personal writing project was a bee. The only rule I made for myself was no matter what I drew, the drawing had to contain a bee. At first, I considered participating in Inktober, an art challenge I heard of from the podcast 3 Point Perspective. However, since I mainly use coloring pencils at the moment, I decided on Peachtober instead. For those who don't know, Peachtober is a list of creative art prompts created by an Australian artist called Very Little Peach. Creators of different mediums follow these prompts to illustrate, make pottery, do sewing projects, create collages, etc. I decided to participate in Peachtober because I felt that it was more flexible. It also helped that the very first prompt on the list was bee, so I kind of felt it was meant to be. In this video, I'll be going through my preliminary ideas, the rough sketches for each prompt, references I used, and then followed by the final sketch. Due to the length of my footage, I'll be splitting it into 2 videos. Therefore, I'll only give a wrap-up of my experience participating in a drawing challenge in part 2 of this Drawing Challenge Sketchbook Tour series. So without further ado, please join me as I document my illustrating journey. Hi everyone, welcome to my sketchbook. I'm going to go through my rough sketches of each idea and then afterwards show you the final sketch I used for the prompt before continuing to the next one. Cool. Okay, so for the first prompt, B, I wanted to introduce the character, and also just start out easy. So that's why I decided, let's just draw a bee. But I also played around with the idea of maybe drawing a bee in a cute or different way, because I mainly drew bees like this, standing on something. But yeah, I wondered if I should have them peeking out of a hole or try and draw a bee holding on to like maybe a twig or something. But I didn't like how it looked more like a worm or something to me. So I decided like, no, that's not an option that I want to do. Here I played a little bit more on putting a bee like on a plant, maybe playing around with the idea of having it near a pumpkin. I'm just gonna move that. I really loved this little bee and having it maybe stand on a flower that arched like this. But then I wondered whether or not I should try to push myself a little bit further, and because this is mainly the way I drew bees in this like static pose, and I wondered if I should have them more in a different variety. So yeah, I decided to try alternative options. Here's just more quick sketches of maybe a bee flying next to a flower, having it on a sunflower. I was still trying to figure out the bodies of a bee, how many circles they had or how the legs were. I can assure you I wasn't feeling it when I was drawing these bees. This is closer to what I did in the end. I really love the blue of these forget-me-nots that I drew. Although I don't like the bee here, I would much prefer the bee I drew in this picture. but I liked where the bee stood, and I liked the idea of these arching flowers. You'll see in the end I did use this idea, but like I said before, I wanted to play around with the idea of using different compositions, because I was introducing this challenge that I'm going to use bees and I would like to draw them in different compositions. That's why I decided on trying something like this. So in the moment I'll show you the final sketch, but you'll see I ended up using these 3 bees, incorporating this one at the top. Yeah, so this was like my first attempt of drawing bees in different compositions, and you'll see I'll have like a little introduction to the little bee. I decided to put it on top of the flowers instead of back, just because I wanted to see its body a little bit better. So this is how it turned up in the end. These little 3 bees, and this is probably, he's not really sitting on the flowers. It's kind of like, it can maybe seem like he's falling off, but for the first try I was quite happy. And I had a little introduction. Hi, my name is Honeybee. Come along this Peachtober and learn more about my friends, our home, and the things we like to do. I ended up writing a little story or cartoon scenes thing for some of the images. Some of the images I couldn't think of anything, but I really had fun with it. For the next prompt, it was Cosmos, and I really wanted to use, kind of like to keep it relevant to the world my bee was living in. I decided on focusing on the flowers rather than space. I could have drawn a bee maybe looking up into the stars, but I decided to keep a little bit easier for myself. So I played around with different types of compositions for the flowers, and I also wanted to play around with maybe adding a little bit like creatures. I remember this was a picture on Pinterest. It's a white flower with a ladybug pulling down the petals like this. If I can find it, I'll pop it up on the screen. I really loved how it looked like, so I just made it a cosmos flower. And then I basically just looked at different pictures of cosmoses and just kind of like selected single ones and then added the ladybugs in between. Yeah, I mainly just did these 2 rough sketches, and in the end this is how it came out. I really love the pink color, and compared to the previous one, I like how I brought a little bit more of the background in. It's not just a single flower standing in the middle of nowhere, and I really liked the little ladybug pulling the petal, and again having the bee actually flying. One of the first attempts of drawing a bee flying. It's quite tricky, but I'm quite satisfied with how it came out. Oh, and then I just did a little bit of a research to make it relevant. So this is a cosmos flower. It is related to my friend Miss Sunflower. They are native to the scrub and meadows in Mexico and came to South Africa via horse feed during the Anglo-Boer War. So trying to make it relevant to South Africa, since the farm that my bees live in is on a farm in South Africa. So trying to explain why there are cosmos in South Africa. So for the third prompt, it was sweet. So I played with the idea. I know bees don't necessarily eat honey, but I immediately thought of honey and then producing it and playing kind of like with the idea of maybe the bee sticking its head into the honeycomb or having the hive. So this is a picture I printed because of which I practiced. So I drew, it's probably too light to see, but I used a pencil and drew on the bees just to kind of like understand how many circles they were. Like 2 tiny ones and then maybe 3 big ones, and then the last 2 get joined. I find the wings extremely difficult, so you could see like I tried to draw something for myself like from here and here, and that's how they connect, but my wings, they never look similar. So it's a continuous struggle. In this one, here I decided maybe just to focus on a honeycomb. This is also a picture I printed out, to maybe just try to replicate a honeycomb or a hive. you'll see this is basically what I did in the end. Here I was just trying to play around with the colors and seeing how I would manage to get it shining or like looking gooey. And I decided to, I know, like I said, no, they don't necessarily eat honey, but I wanted to play around with the idea that the bee sneakily got some honey and was trying to hide it. But you know, when we are kids, you eat sugar or you eat the chocolates secretly, but you have chocolate still smudge around your mouth and trying to look innocent while having the evidence basically right on your face. So this is kind of the same thing that I wanted to try and do. So in the end, this is how it came out. I decided not to use the drops. So yeah, having my little bee and then just having a little story. I don't care what you saw, it wasn't me. So yeah. One interesting fact about this is while I was doing it, I listened to Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book on The Graveyard Book on YouTube. He narrates the story probably at a book fair or somewhere, but they recorded the whole thing, and I totally recommend it. He's an amazing writer and reader, and if you're interested, I'll link it down below. The fourth prompt was Grub, and for that I had the idea of to have a bird and a bee kind of like look at worms, as in grub being food. And so my association with grub is bugs. So I had the idea of drawing a bee with maybe worms and them looking at it, and the bee being kind of a bit disgusted, not interested in eating the worms. But I've never really drawn birds before. So these are not my own original creations. I was trying to understand different ways people draw birds. So I was looking at people's sketches, trying to understand how they simplify a bird. So yeah, I just went on, I think Pinterest probably, and just looked at some images of people drawing birds and just trying to figure out how they do it. Some of these are images as well. Me just trying to figure out, okay, we have the head and then we have the beak as well. If I manage to find some of these other images I used, I'll also pop them up on the screen and give credit where credit is due. This was a picture, it was a crow. I just don't like how scary the bird looked, because I wanted to have the bird realistic enough, but not have it too realistic or too terrifying. But I wanted it to be a crow. But these kind of like look like seabirds, like seagulls. But this one looks terrifying. I won't want my bee to sit right next to it. So yeah, in the end, I just drew something quick just to get an idea. I had the idea of having the bird holding a leaf, maybe, as a suggestion, serving suggestion to the bee, and then the bee would say like, thanks, but I think I'll stick to honey or with honey. And then instead of having the bird hold the leaf, because let's be honest, it's extremely difficult to draw a bird's claws, so I had them placed on a leaf, and then kind of like looking at the worms, but I wasn't satisfied with how tiny the earthworms were looking. I wanted to make them big and juicy and just a little bit stand out more, because I'm drawing on paper. I can't like zoom in on a digital thing and draw it the details very neatly. I had to, and Prismacolor pencils are quite soft, so if you press too hard they break. So to sharpen it every time, you're basically going to lose your pencil and not be able to draw a lot of detail. Okay, I'm just going to, I will go through the pages I'm skipping at the moment. Okay, so I drew another one after this, just to get the composition right. I like this bird I drew, so I know the bird looks more blue than black. This was a conscious decision that I did. So I know crows are generally more black, and this kind of looks more like a sparrow color. At the time I didn't have a lot of black, and this was in the beginning of the challenge, and I knew I was going to need black for the bees a lot, so I deliberately decided to make the bird a bluish color, and I also didn't want it to look as harsh. So I know I say it's a crow, so yeah, I decided to make it blue rather than black. I like having the worm in its mouth, but like I said before, I wasn't really happy with how the worms were looking. So I got the idea, I don't know, well, I hope all of you are familiar with The Lion King, and in the scene I'll also pop this image. I had this image of Timon and Pumbaa lifting the tree trunk and revealing all of the grubs. So yes, I got inspiration of having fat and juicy bugs from The Lion King, and rather have it in a bowl, a leaf bowl, than having it just on a leaf as well. So this was kind of like the idea. And then my husband, very cleverly, when I had this idea, he said like he's very uncomfortable with having the bee basically on the leaf with the grub. Doesn't that make him grub as well? So instead of having the bee sitting opposite to the bird, I opted to putting the bee on bird's back, kind of like they are friends, instead of it being like you are grub as well. And then in the end I decided to add a little bit of the earthworms just to have a variety. Yeah, so for the final sketch, this is how it looks. I think the portion of the bird isn't quite right, but I like how it turned out. I don't have a lot of experience drawing birds, but yeah, I like how it came out with the idea, and it's interesting to see the process that I went through getting here. But yeah, I still kept the story to no thank you, I think I'll stick with honey. So yeah, it was the experience, and interesting learning how ideas can develop. So the next prompt was Sprig. I'm not really fond of what I did here. So I googled it, and the idea of a sprig being something tiny that's growing. So I had the idea of maybe having a garden and someone taking little tiny snippets of plants in the garden, or just having a bee in the garden. But then I decided to just draw these little bottles and have tiny sprigs in them. Maybe, when you put it in a window and just have a bee sitting on top of it. Interesting enough, while I was drawing this, my family was playing a card game called Bridge in the kitchen. So yeah, it's fond memories of family sitting in the kitchen. I basically just drew the thing as it was. This is how it turned out in the end. Unfortunately, I think I overworked the paper because I wanted it to shine, and then it's still a learning curve. This is the first time I drew glass, and but yeah, unfortunately it's a bit muddled and muddy, and I couldn't get it to shine because I overworked the paper, and then it didn't want to take any more color in as well. The little story I wrote was: Honeybee loves spending time in the farmer's wife's kitchen. She regularly takes small stems from her garden and puts them into little colorful bottles. So just trying to make it relevant to the world my bee was living in. But yeah, the next prompt was number 6. And originally I thought that I was going to draw just the eye of a bee. Yet again, just to keep it simple, keep it easy. But then, I don't know, I wanted to push myself, and I sort of, these exercises really made my creative brain flow with inspiration. So then I wondered, but what if the bee went to an eye doctor? And so if there was an eye doctor, what type of insect would it be? So I decided on using a praying mantis, and my husband very funnily called him Dr. P. Mantis. So I looked at a bunch of images of praying mantises, and I picked the praying mantis because the wings kind of reminded me of a doctor's coat. So at first I just draw the bee, and I had this little spectroscope and a little light and a little glass. I was fond of this idea, but I wanted it to like lean a little bit forward, pretending to look at the bee. So then I drew this one, and I absolutely love it so much. Dr. Praying Mantis is definitely one of my favorite characters that came out of this drawing challenge, and it's creating characters is definitely one of the things that I did not expect while doing this challenge. I just thought I was going to get better at drawing bees in different compositions. I love how I drew him a little bit leaning forward, and then I played around with maybe having a waiting room and other bugs here, maybe a board, and then having like steps or a ladder taking the insects onto the place where they need to sit. In the end, this is how it came out. I drew a few little bugs on the ground and had a little sign saying waiting room and reception area, and then having a little, well, obviously the bee didn't have to climb, but I mean some of these insects, well, most of them don't need the ladder, to be honest. They can probably just climb onto the plant, but just for storying effect, this is what I came out with. Interesting fact, I actually drew this while flying in an airplane. Was going to visit family while I was doing this. And then a little story, Dr. Praying Mantis asking bee, now hold your eyes still please, and honeybee saying which eye, because bees, they have, I read they had 3 eyes. Some of them are sensory, and they don't see, actually have like 3 eyes. No, I think they have 5 eyes, because they have like 3 eyes on the top of their head, but it's more like sensory eyes. And then they have the 2 eyes in front, so just kind of like playing with being funny with him asking the bee to hold his eyes still. But this one is definitely one of my favorite drawings, and I'm actually currently developing a little story on this, which I hope that I would in the future, well, soon be able to share with everyone. Prompt number 7 was crater, and I think I was on a high because of the previous one, Dr. Praying Mantis. So I had the idea of drawing a footprint in the sand and having the bugs or the insects look at the footprint, and having the footprint be the crater for them. So yet again, I deliberately didn't want to go space themed. I wanted to keep it relevant to the world I was creating. So I opted of drawing a footprint. This was one of the hardest things I had to draw in this challenge. I've never had to draw a footprint and have it like 3-dimensional, and I looked at so many images. Me and my husband took so many images of us stepping into mud puddles, and in the end my sister came to the rescue. She found a cement, someone cast a footprint in cement or concrete. It's images on Instagram, and I'll pop it up on the screen as well, and it came to the rescue because I had this idea, but I had no reference of how to make it look or seem deep, but this is more or less kind of like the image idea that I used. I just needed some help with making it deeper. So this is what I did in the end. So this was technically also just a rough sketch. If you can see like the way I did the grass, I usually do a little bit smoother, but I absolutely love how I did the footprint. Here I messed something up with the end circle or oval, but I absolutely love how it came out and the little story, and I'm really proud of developing a background if you compare to the first one I drew in the challenge. And I don't know how to express it, how amazing this drawing challenge was, because I had this idea and I had no idea how I would be able to get it from this to this. And it's amazing drawing different drawings and eventually getting to it. I did attempt to redraw it again, but in the end I prefer this one. So I prefer this footprint and the way I did the layout. But what I don't like about this one is I accidentally mixed up the browns that I used. I think what I was supposed to do is the light brown I was supposed to use for the ground, and I was supposed to use this brown for the footprint. If you compare it to this, the footprint looks darker than the ground, and here it's swapped, and to me it messes with my brain. It doesn't make it look like it's deepening. But yeah, I prefer the patterns of the footprint in this one, but I prefer the overall look of this one. But yeah, still very, very proud of what I managed to create with that prompt. Prompt number 8. The next one is prompt number 8. It's dream. So while I was visiting family doing this, and as you visit family, you don't really have a lot of time drawing, but I couldn't come up with an idea of what to draw, so I decided to maybe just draw 2 insects and have them have a conversation about what their dream could be. What is your dream, honeybee? What do you want to become when you grow up? So that's the kind of the story idea that I went with. I considered for a moment to draw a dung beetle, or I'm not sure, is that what you call it? But I really like how it turned up. I eventually didn't use it at all in the challenge, but I will come back to it as well. So I decided to opt for drawing a bee and an ant, and have the ant ask honeybee what they want to become, and then have the options pop in of what they could be. I really had fun with this, coming up with the options, and then you'll see I ended up taking some of the ideas and using it in further challenges. So in the end, what I drew was just basically this, having a little ant and little bee, and then so having a bee want to become a bloomist since they fly around between flowers, pollinating, being a pilot, they're flying, courier, delivering the nectar from the flowers to the honey hive, the honeycomb, the hive, the beehive, gynecologist because they pollinate flowers and plants. I thought that was quite funny. And then just maybe like a queen bee, it could be interesting. But yeah, it shows you sometimes you don't have to do big things. I don't have to create Dr. Praying Mantises and creator images for every challenge. Sometimes you can keep it a little bit simple. And in the end, I had another character. Really love drawing ants as characters as well, so I added that to my repertoire. The next one was blue. My original idea, I don't have any drawings of it, I think, but I originally thought of drawing a rabbit, because the main characters in the story I have is a bee, a sunflower, a crow, and a rabbit. So on the story that I'm working on, and the reason I'm practicing drawing bees is because of this story with these 3 main characters. So I had the idea of having a rabbit eating a bunch of blueberries and then having it smudged on its face. But in the end, I decided to keep it a little bit more simple. So on the farm that I grew up, we have a lot of mulberries. In Afrikaans, you would say moerbeye. I remember coming from school and then eating them, and then our hands being all very dark purple, black, and our feet as well. So I know it's more of a deep purple and not really a blue. But sometimes when you wash it out, it takes time to wash out and then it looks more blue than purple. So yeah, in the end, I decided to have a little twig with mulberries on it and having the ants carrying them, and then the bee trying to carrying it as well. And then as kind of like a reference back to this one, the bee wanting to be a courier, I decided to continue that story, having the bee work with the ants and trying out a life of being a courier. And you'll see in some of the upcoming prompts, you'll see honeybee and the ants continuing their journey as they are delivering the mulberries to some of the animals on the farm. The fun fact that I played around with this. So in the end, the final sketch looks very similar to what I've done. The story idea that I had for it was, so ants can carry a lot more in terms of compared to their weight and how much they can carry more than what they weigh than bees. We have honeybee saying now, you guys are just showing off, because honeybee is carrying a very tiny mulberry and they're just carrying it with their pinchers and very, very big, fat, juicy ones. So I had that little story working in. So for the next prompt is citrus. Originally, I thought of just drawing a bunch of fruit. Yet again, just trying to keep it simple. But it was just so boring. So I had fun figuring out how to draw, how the inside of an orange or a citrus fruit could look like. Yet again, one of the first times I ever had to do it. But then my husband, my dear loving husband, challenged me and said, but why don't you draw like a story idea of maybe like a juice bar with the lemon and some of the insects serving it to the other insects. So I decided to create a fruit fly. Another character that I did not anticipate of creating. I absolutely love this idea. So meet fruit fly Fred. This is Fred, and he has a local juice bar on Valtefreda, and on this day he served orange juice to all his bee customers. I love this because I ended up practicing drawing bees in different compositions and actually drawing a bee drinking something. You'll see in the final sketch, well, here's just me trying to figure out how to angle this booth. But in the end, I prefer the way I drew Fred here. I like the brownish color that I used, and I really love how I drew his eye. In the final sketch, I just sort of messed it up. It's not that bad. I prefer him being a little bit more bendy, like his legs are very like noodly. So I like what I did with this one. So here's what we have in the end. If you can see, he has a little bit more of a pointy nose compared to, and he looks quite angry compared to here. He doesn't really have emotion in this one, but I prefer him. He just looks natural face. So I prefer the way he looked in that one. So I'll refer back to this one when I draw it. I think the booth came out okay, and I really like my bee drinking its orange juice. So this is also another fun little story that came out of the challenge that I did not expect at all. Okay, off to the next one. So for the next one, it was pencil. Since I drew something a little bit more hectic, I decided to keep it simple for this one, pencil. This was quite interesting. I did not know how to make it relevant to the world, and my mom was so brilliant. She said, why don't you use a feather? Since we have a crow in our story and we've been introduced to it in prompt number 4, I think, Grub, I just thought of the idea of honeybee using a feather. I only realized a little bit later that I have the feather at the wrong end of this word, because we in Afrikaans and English, you don't write from right to left, you write from left to right. So it would not make sense to have the feather stop at the H. What's the word? Unless Honeybee had to adjust something. So this doesn't make sense, but yeah, I kept it simple in the end. It mainly looks like that. I don't know why I drew the bee so small, but yeah, in the end, this is what we have. This kind of like ties also into the story of Honeybee being a courier. In some of the later prompts, you'll see Honeybee delivering a bunch of mulberries to one of the animals, and the person or animal that Honeybee was delivering the mulberries to weren't at home, so they decided to write a message on the ground, and this is them starting to write the message. Okay, for the next prompt, it was nest. So I decided to try and draw the crow character again, and maybe it's kind of like a throwback back to the eye prompt. I had the idea of Honeybee going to the eye doctor because their eyes weren't functioning, as they were struggling seeing things. And then after the appointment with the doctor, they got a prescription to get some glasses. But Honeybee didn't have glasses, so then Honeybee went to visit Mrs. Crow. I don't have names for my characters yet, so I will figure them out. But then Honeybee went to visit Mrs. Crow, and because Mrs. Crow collects all sorts of things, because crows love to collect shiny objects, and so I had this idea of having a crow and Honeybee sitting on a nest and having the nest full of objects and shiny things, and then have Mrs. Crow have a little tiny glasses in her mouth, in her beak, that's the word, and kind of like handing it to her. Here I just practiced drawing nests, having a little bit more like bushy or sticky. It was also a challenge as well. In the end, I like this drawing more, just kind of like how the nest turned out, more or less. But yeah, here we have Mrs. I know it doesn't look like a crow, it looks more like a budgie. But anyway, we have Mrs. Crow and Honeybee sitting on the nest, and we have like a needle and thread, a key, safety pin, some Coke bottles, and other bottles, and like a 1 cent and some bits and bobs, and with the glasses in her mouth, giving it to Honeybee. Yeah, I think this is an interesting idea, and I would definitely return back to it in the future. Cool. So for the next prompt, it's a continue of Honeybee being a courier, like I explained a little bit earlier. The prompt is called ship. So I played around with the idea of using a leaf as a boat, and then having the ant and Honeybee delivering the mulberries via boat. There's a specific image on Pinterest that I'll show that gave me kind of like, I knew I wanted to use a leaf as a boat, but I wasn't sure of how to do it, and the illustration kind of like helped me just to visualize what I wanted to create. I really love this drawing, and I love the colors that I used in the end. This is definitely one of my favorite ones. This is a new blue that I ended up using. For some reason I didn't color in the light, but yeah, I like the idea of Honeybee strapping a piece of thread onto themselves and just pulling the ant and the mulberries to the place that they need to go. So yeah, this is quite fun. For the next one, I yet again just kept it simple. The prompt was garden. I actually don't like what I did. I ended up just drawing a few pots with flowers in them. So I have a very tiny balcony garden. I live in a tiny flat, and my only garden is a little balcony garden. So I ended up just drawing a few pot plants and have honeybee sit on them. There's not really anything to it, and there's not really a story, and the end picture doesn't look much different than the practice one. So yeah, this is not one of my favorites. It's just a tiny image, but like I said, sometimes you do tiny images and that's also okay. The next prompt is also just like a very quick one. The prompt was weather, and I had that idea of honeybee trying to keep out of the rain with a leaf and using it as an umbrella. And then I quite liked having the bee looking away from us. But then in the end, I decided to have a little story maybe, and have the bee sitting or standing underneath a leaf umbrella and calling a little worm towards them. One thing before I show the final thing, it is so difficult to draw raindrops, without them looking too regular. This is definitely something that I need to practice, and I don't like how I need to practice drawing raindrops, because it's like you want to add, they need to have enough but not too much, and I think I went over the too much, and I like the way I do the puddles and the worm and having the drops splash the water, and I also like how I drew it onto the leaf itself and having it roll off. But general drops falling, I need to practice drawing that. But yeah, this is weather. Hi everyone, that brings us to the end of the first half of this drawing challenge sketchbook tour series. Thank you so much for watching and for following along with the process I went through with each prompt so far. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand. Tot ziens.